Welcome to Just Think About It with Nadine and Ben. We're recording this episode on Tuesday, September 24th, 2024. Before we start our conversation, we have two key requests. First, if you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe via Apple, Spotify, X, YouTube, or your platform of choice, and make sure to hit the like button. Second, we appreciate any kind notes as we get started and letting your friends know where to find us. You're in for a treat today. We are connecting with Allison Kluger, a four-time Emmy-nominated producer with over 25 years of experience in broadcast media and entertainment, from network television like Good Morning America and The View to new media platforms, including electronic retail, interactive television, and digital media. She is also a freelance writer and media consultant. Her superpowers are being an innovative content creator, an expert at messaging, and a media coach across platforms. So I'm sure we're going to learn a lot today. But since 2013, Allison is also a lecturer of organizational behavior at Stanford's Graduate School of Business in 4 courses, 3 of which she created. And those include reputation management, strategic communication, personal branding, and strategic pivoting for your next chapter. She also created seminars and one-day workshops on executive presence for women, storytelling as strategy, personal and business branding, and media training. She's a recipient of the Dorothy J. King Lecture in Leadership for 2017 to 2018, the Class of 1978 Lectureship of 2024 to 2025, which I'm very proud of her for. And she just received the Excellence in Teaching Award from the MSX Class of 2024. She's an advisor for many of her graduate students' new ventures. She mentors young women and men in leadership and personal branding, and gives lectures and keynote speeches all over the world. And she kindly reminds me to stop wearing black all the time, or at least add a pop of color. So this is for you today, Allison. Welcome.
Thank you for that wonderful intro. And you look very colorful, and I'm very proud of you.
Well, Ben and I wanted to make a full disclaimer here that we are a huge fan of Allison's and had a hard time deciding into which topics we wanted to delve today, because she has so many insights and skills to share with us. So we decided to start with one topic that we know she's passionate about, and that is storytelling. And I've always thought that people fall in love with you when they hear your story, because that's really what makes you different from everyone else. So Allison, perhaps you could start us off with why you think storytelling is so important, not just in a personal realm, but also in a professional realm.
Nadine, I think storytelling is the crux of differentiation. The only thing that you can do that no one can take from you is tell your own story. And that's what creates your credibility. That's what makes you three-dimensional. That's what breaks stereotypes. And then it's also about connecting to your audience. When people feel that they know you better, they'll like you more, and they'll want to invest, or they'll want to support you or evangelize. So storytelling is a tool that everybody can use. And sometimes they don't realize that if you can tell a succinct, effective story, and someone else can take that story, they will create opportunities for you. And it's much more powerful than statistics and data, because people can only remember 2 to 3 statistics at a time from an entire seminar.
That's helpful. And I know that you coach a lot of people, and it's important to tell your story in that correct context, which is what you're saying. So how does someone tell their story and I know you make a point of saying in a short, medium, and long version, and why is that important?
Well, it goes back to this framework that I think is the most important framework for any communication, and it's called AIM: audience, intent, and message. And audience is the most important element. And so before you ever speak, before you decide what your message is, you have to know who you're talking to. And so that's where kind of storytelling comes in. But I wouldn't tell the same story to different audiences. I would make sure I know, what does the audience want to know? What do they need to know? And what do they expect from me? Also, I will anticipate and say, okay, who might be skeptical? Who might embrace this and who might not care at all? And then I will front load content to make sure that every faction in my audience feels seen and heard. As for the timing, if the higher you go up on a hierarchy, whether it's, a board member or the CEO, the shorter your story should be.
Really?
Because people don't want to listen to a long story. But, if you're doing, we've all heard of the elevator pitch, right? That should be your 1-minute story. If you happen to bump into someone who you've been dying to talk to, or who might be an opportunity for you to partner with, you better have your story down straight. And that's basically who you are, what you're doing, why you care about what you're doing, why they should care and be interested, and what your plans are moving forward. And for those who find those 5 steps really hard to remember, I have a 3-word framework, which is what, so what, now what. So what is it that you want to tell people? And then the so what is, so what's the significance of that information? Why should they care? And then now what? What do you plan on doing moving forward?
And when you're talking to people, my guess is you're teaching this because people aren't good at it. Is that a fair statement? And maybe you can kind of look at why are people, is it just that they're not preparing and not being thoughtful about who their audience is and how they've thought about themselves and what they're going to communicate? Or what's the stumbling block why people aren't doing this well?
I think that most people think about what they want to say and not what the audience needs to hear. And so you really need to flip it. All of us are a domain expert at something, and we know way more than our audience does. So when we want to speak and share our knowledge, we don't really know how to synthesize. And there's also part of us that wants to prove how smart we are,
right,
how much we know, that we've put the work in, which is totally normal. But sometimes your audience already knows some of the things you've told them, or they've read up on you. So I always say, say what they need to know and then elaborate. So my favorite thing to tell people is be succinct, be efficient. And then when you're finished, say, would you like me to elaborate on anything? Do you want to dig deeper? Do you have any questions? Because now you're giving the audience permission to interact with you. And they're not just the recipients of a monologue. There's more interactivity.
That can go along with writing as well. I remember as a young analyst right out of grad school, Fidelity, writing book reports, and the portfolio manager make this 1 or 2 pages, please. If I want more, we can go over it more, right? So it's not just that. Could you give an example of somebody who thinks a really good storytelling? Like a comedian sounds like someone who fits that AIM framework, for example, because the audience is always different. I don't know. Give us an example who you think of, like a profession or a person who is excellent at that.
Well, you immediately said comedian, and 2 people come to mind. One is Sebastian Maniscalco, and he's telling stories, but what makes it funny is they're his stories from an Italian point of view, growing up Italian, and being in a mixed marriage. And he talks about parenthood, like very common themes with his own spin. Yeah. Kevin Hart is also excellent. Comedians who are successful aren't making jokes like bada bing, bada ba, right? They're telling stories, and they're telling stories though with vocal intonation and expressions. And when we communicate, we have to communicate on all cylinders. So it's vocal, verbal, and visual. And I think sometimes people forget, you could be the smartest person in the room, Ben, but if you don't deliver your message in a charismatic or engaging manner, no one's going to listen to you. So if I came on this...
a message there? I'm just kidding.
Not at all. I know. I said Ben. But
in though.
Take it in.
But look, what if if I said to my students on my first day teaching, I'm like, I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be a great quarter. Can't wait. Right? They're already going to shut me down. I'm not credible. I'm not interesting. But if I go, I am so excited to be here today. We're going to have a wonderful quarter. You guys are going to learn how to present and not be anxious. There's a totally different way that they're going to take you in. So I don't know. Let me think about the storytelling for anyone who's not a comedian, but
I'll give you one more comedian. We just saw Chelsea Handler. She's really good at stories. A little bit inappropriate, but we'll come back to that another time. But I have a follow-up question for that, Allison, is how can business presenters effectively incorporate storytelling, audience engagement, and even user-generated content to make their presentations more compelling? Because one of the things you're touching upon is making that connection. It's not about droning on about something. It's about intonation. But how do you make that connection so people feel like they're on that journey with you?
I have these engagement techniques I teach the class, and the first one is called parachuting in. Have any of you ever seen Law and Order, like SVU or right? So what do? It's kind of in media res, which means they start in the action. Someone's walking and they discover a body. They always discover a body.
Yeah.
And, you're not really sure what's happening. They could be in a park, they could be at a club, but you start in the action. That's kind of what we're saying is, if you were going to speak publicly, I wouldn't start by saying, "Hi, I'm Allison Kluger. I'm really happy to be here." I started my first day of classes yesterday, and I start my class with this: you cannot not communicate. Let me repeat. You cannot not communicate. Everything you say, how you dress, how you stand, your expressions, and what you don't say signals something to your audience. And so I start with a strong thought or a top line message, because that's way more interesting than the preamble. I know I lost track of what your question was.
And the other part of that was a little bit about how do you make your presentations more compelling? So you're doing a kickoff with something that's going to get them think or take some sort of action like SVU. What else is it that can make professionals be a little bit more compelling when they're doing that storytelling?
Well, I am a great believer in visuals. Your platform that you're doing may not always support that, but I think the reason my classes are successful and why I speak all over is I always have a very rich and robust deck. Which
it's also your hair too. Let's be real. You have very good hair, and we have to notice that.
I have to say that all three of us are really scoring high on the hair
good hair
department
club,
today.
But we're the leader. If there's a club leader, you're the club leader. Let's just put that
I appreciate that, but don't make Ben feel bad. He has a great hair day today, Ben. So I think that I forgot what I was saying, Nadine.
I know, it's too good. So how do you make it more compelling? What can people do? You said sometimes you can use visuals, but sometimes you can't.
Yeah. So
I think I'm listening.
I thank you for paying attention. I think from my television days that what I believe is that visual cues are a way for people to remember and be engaged. I'm a visual learner. I don't know about either one of you, but I need someone to show me how to do something as opposed to reading directions. And that's just how I am. So I feel like at least with visuals, let's say you're an international student or an international client, or you don't, maybe you have ADD and you can't pay attention that much. Visuals are a really helpful tool because they pull you into it. And I teach my classes almost as if they're a mini TV show.
Okay.
So I'm never going to just lecture for 40 minutes straight. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to have fun videos. I'm going to have clean slides. Sometimes it's just an evocative visual, which I can talk to, but I'm never going to have these dense slides that you have to read and struggle with. And unfortunately, in a lot of areas like consulting or software, a lot of these slides don't serve the audience. So if you keep something in mind, you always have an audience, whether it's an audience of one, your team, the board members, a new customer. Your goal is to serve your audience, is to make it easy for them, to anticipate their questions, to provide them the information they need ahead of time. So those are all things that make presentations stronger personally and professionally is, again, what do they need and want to know, and how can I make that easier for them? Because if I do, there's less back and forth and there's more of a chance they're going to do what you want them to do.
So when we think about like your students, what do you do? Like, what is the way that you get them to like create a brand, or what's the process? Especially, some of your students, you guys are Stanford people. I'm sure they're a little more on the shy side. How do you get that out of them, and what's the approach to that?
Well, people always say, what's my brand? And I'm like, well, if you don't know your brand, perhaps you should ask the people closest to you how they would describe you. So, I would describe myself as someone who's like warm and no BS and interested and very present. And when people say, what's your brand? I say, my brand is blunt but kind. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm really efficient. I will identify something, but I also never want to make you feel diminished or embarrassed. So I think that's why in my media consulting business, I do well, because I'm always looking for what do you already do great and what is it that I think you can elevate. But for people who are searching for their brand, it's how do you consistently show up? And there's also the twist, which is, are you aware of how you show up? That's why I teach reputation management. It's like, is what you're putting out there what you think you're putting out there?
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
are receiving you the way you think they are. That's a whole nother kit and caboodle. But I have my students do a survey to say, what do you think I'm good at? What are my leadership skills? What are 5 words to describe me? But a lot of the branding comes from pivoting too. They want to go from a software person to maybe investment banking. So I try to help them find commonality with what they've done and how to wrap it in a new narrative so that they seem like they would be credible as they move into a new area. And part of brand building is identifying the things you've done in the past that always show up with you. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And, so you had, Nadine told me you had a class with Tyra Banks and Alex Rodriguez. This is what you were teaching, basically, the students?
Yeah, I didn't have it with both of them together because that would have been
Vigilant.
too much star power for sure.
I know.
Tyra and I did a course on personal branding, and it was called Project You. And there were a lot of lessons that, a lot of mantras that actually Tyra came up with because she's a marketing genius. And I'll never forget this. What she says is different is better than better. Or, different is better than perfect. I've heard both of them. But what she's trying to say is don't try to be someone else. Perfect is actually, in my mind, very neutral. Like if you're perfect, there's no texture to you. There's no quirk. And you're not going to differentiate yourself. But being different and celebrating what it is what makes you stand out and what makes you memorable. Nadine knows this very well, that I am a pop culture fanatic. It could very well diminish my credibility.
That's your quirk that we love.
Right. But there's never have a People magazine like far from me. Like here's my Snoop's on the cover this week, but there's always one in my bag. And it's from my TV days, fascination with people and stories. But I could be really embarrassed about it because I don't read Economic Times and finance magazines, even though I'm at a business school. But you know what? It's part of who I am. So I own it. So what I say is like, what makes you different? What makes you stand out? And what's the story behind it?
So let me ask you this. So you worked in TV and obviously Tyra pivoted from being a model to TV. And how do you convey attention? SVU was a good example because they do that dong, dong, dong. And then they get you. How do you work with commercials? Because, now we have an era where there's so much fewer commercials. You have a more captive period of time. But when you were a producer for The View, you got to come back and come in and out. How do you recapture someone's attention, whether it's a presentation or it's TV, once you kind of had a lull? What is it a strategy for that?
I've never gotten that question before, and it's so interesting. So thank you. Let me think for a moment.
Don't fill his head.
Lynn, stop trying to gotcha me. So, with television, each segment is about 3.5 minutes, which seems really short, but it's actually very long in television. And I'm going to tell you this funny story. Keep me on track, though, if I don't answer your question. Yeah. But when I was a freshman in college, I took creative writing. And I was always amazing at English and writing. I have writers in my family and always the teacher's pet. Except in this case, this teacher hated me. Her name was Biff Russ. Personally, I think she hated her name and was just taking it out on me. But Biff did not like my writing, and she was very clear about it. And finally, I found out why. And she said, Allison, you have very complex ideas, but you write like People magazine. Shocked that she even knew People magazine. And I did have a People in my bag, in my knapsack. Now, my original feeling was like, God, I'm going to fail this class, and she doesn't like me, and I'm terrible and all that. But what I realized was that Biff told me my brand very early on, because the first thing that I did out of college was I worked at Good Morning America, when my job is to synthesize complex ideas and create language and messaging that's for the masses, right? Takeaways, visuals, all of that. And so that was my superpower, even though she made me feel like I was a failure. So what everything I do is about, how do I keep the attention of the audience? And I use myself, what would make me lean in? But restating a top line message, tying everything in a bow, which means, before we leave, the 4 points I want you to remember is this, 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 a really great opening statement. And maybe, even B-roll, which is footage, or graphics that show and not just tell. Again, for all the different people who are learning. So that's what I would do for television. In presentations, it's kind of the same thing. I'm going to use humor. I'm going to use storytelling cadence, expressions. I'm going to act things out. I'm going to use all my 5 senses to make whatever I'm saying more interesting and engaging for you.
Right. And because I think that makes sense when I've seen people thrown on or go on a tangent, then usually making fun of yourself or a joke can redirect you back to where you were.
Yeah, I was just consulting with someone yesterday, and he's someone who's a salesman, and he seems really good at communicating. And I said, so what's the one thing you can work on? He's like, well, I do tend to tell long stories. And I said, how's that going for you? And he's like, I love telling them. He goes, but once in a while I'll look and read the room and I'll be like, I think you guys want me to stop my story and just tell them the product. And I'm like, well, that's excellent self-awareness. And I said, yes. I said, look, you need just what you started out asking me. You need to have that story in 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. And you need to read the room and know what do they want from you. And so, I think we all could benefit from a little.
All really funny. Comedian can keep you going for 10 and 15 minutes story. You're world class, right?
So that's why they practice and practice and practice. And I don't know if you see, even some of the greatest, they have a little sheet of paper that they put on the stool with their water. So they have their high points and they can look at the one line and know how to transition. I'm sure there's some who don't even need the crib notes because they've practiced it enough. I've told everybody this, that winging it is never a good idea. Could I wing it? Yes, I could wing anything. But I'm so much better when I rehearse out loud. And I go all over the world saying very similar talks to people, executive presence, storytelling, but always the morning before or the night before, I do my entire presentation out loud. Always. Even though I know this information like the back of my hand. But the reason is I want to hear it come out of my mouth and it becomes familiar, but I also can improvise. I can cut things out that seem extraneous. And depending on the audience, I might think, you know what, they need more clarification on this. That's my hack. It's a lot of work, but it pays off because I feel so confident when I get on stage that I can make jokes. Or if I've talked to someone before the seminar starts, I'll say, Janet drove in for 3 hours. Janet, I hope this is worth it for you. Something funny like that.
I know that works for a fact because I did my wedding speech and I sent it to myself in the morning hikes for about 2 weeks. And then I didn't have any notes. I just had it memorized. And apparently Winston Churchill was the guy who really started doing that. And so I learned that trick from him. So that is very effective.
Yeah, it's so logical. I practice in my car, in the shower. And I always tell people, if you practice a deck or a presentation in your head, it's always going to sound great. Right? But when you actually verbalize it, that's when you find out that word keeps tripping you up. So Take it out.
So staying on that personal brand, I know you coach students with a personal brand pitch. What does that look like? And what journey do students take on to be able to do that?
Well, it looks like incredible fear on their part, which is why I do it. So what I wanted to do with this class was to introduce different ways of communicating that they've never done. So I was able to get a TV station where I'm on the board. And I said, can we put my students' live pitches on air? And Tyra and I, and in my class with Alex Rodriguez on pivoting, we do pivoting pitches. We will let them do a 1.5 minute branding pitch or pivoting pitch. Okay. And then I will give feedback and Tyra would give feedback, kind of like Shark Tank miniature. Okay. And they were scared, but I would make sure that I had a day of coaching with them. I would make sure that I had one-on-ones with them to practice the pitch out loud. I'd say synthesize here, don't memorize, know your story, right? And think about what are the most important things you want people to know about you. But I think what I keep forgetting to say is know your origin story. People want to understand the why behind the what. So I always say, if I don't know why you care, I'm not going to care. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little anecdote that's really helpful. I had a student who gave a presentation on the environment, and he knew every fact about recycling and litter. There was no doubt in my mind that he was passionate, but it left me completely cold. And when he came to talk to me, I said, look, I have no idea why you care about the environment. Yeah. I said, what if you had started out your talk like this? When I was a little boy, I used to walk on the beach with my grandma every Saturday. That was our time together. And we'd talk about life in school. One day, when we were walking on the beach, a seal had washed up on the shore, and it had plastic around its neck, and it was dead, and it was so horrifying. My grandma and I could never lose that image. After that, I picked up every single piece of litter that I've ever seen, not only at the beach, but on the streets. Now, that's a completely made-up story. But what I said to him...
I'm kidding.
I said, you can buy that story from me. What I said was, you have an origin story.
Right.
Like, what's your origin story? Why do you care about the environment? Because when you tell me, you're going to be more credible. Yeah. I'm going to feel more connected to you. And I'm going to remember that story. But I'm certainly not going to remember all those statistics you told me. That's like in one ear and out the other. I might remember one big statistic. So that's using an origin story, which, by the way, only you have.
Right.
You differentiate. Yeah. You're memorable. You make a bigger impact, and you connect.
And we also
like politicians, right? Isn't this what politicians do?
I can't speak to politicians. I think they have their own strategies, and yes, I think they create their stories that work for them, and their strategy in a different way. But I think that politicians who do it really well are the ones who speak from their heart and who get a sense of why, like. You can't please everyone in politics, so you have to be a little cautious about what you say because you know you're going to offend somebody. It's just the way it is. But I do believe, Ben, that the more authentic their story is and the more they dig deep into like why they want to serve people, the stronger they are.
But why are they all liars then? I mean, I totally believe you. Like, and I believe that if politicians just told the truth, people will be like, hey, I like that guy or I like that girl, or they told the truth. They all are liars. You would think that they listen to you, Allison.
They really should, and send them my way. Sure. There's one I'm not going to coach, but I can't say that.
But kind of building on this topic here, we also want to cover an area that you're known for, and that is keeping your cool. If anybody that I know well, and I know you well, like you keep your cool pretty darn well. And so drawing from your experience as a TV talent, and not the hand model, so I have to throw that in there. That's amazing. But an executive producing, how do you see the parallels between preparing for a live broadcast and preparing for a high-stakes business presentation?
For me, it's like I wouldn't enter a room or enter air unless I knew my stuff.
Yeah.
I think that you're setting yourself up for disaster if you think you can wing it. And I think that a lot of the preparation, again, is who's your audience? What is the intent behind this? Do you want them to invest? Again, do you want them to support you? And then what is your message? And is your message memorable? So whether it's professional or personal, you just have to know why you're doing this. I mean, not every personal conversation is going to be this strategic, but I think in profession, if you're invited into a room to speak, there's a reason. And that reason is because you're the best person, hopefully, to do it. Well, you have to live up to that. Right. Be the best person. And I've always, when I did on-air work and I was a home shopping host, I used to throw up every morning before I went on air. I was so nervous. And Nadine doesn't believe this, Ben, but I am an introvert. She thinks I'm an extrovert.
I don't believe it.
But I flex, but I was a very shy kid. I would cry all the time. I'd hide behind my mom's skirt. I mean, truly. But what I've learned is that when I know my content really well, it kicks in.
Right.
So my first set of nerves, when I'd start a show, I'd start with like an opening statement and then start talking about a product. And I just knew it so well that my nerves would go away.
And, in your Stanford courses, though, Allison, on reputation management and strategic communication, what strategies do you teach for maintaining composure and messaging effectively during could be unexpected challenges, whether it's somebody, yelling something out or people not paying attention or whatever it is that could be your own nerves as you're talking about that derail you or a question you didn't expect. what are the strategies you're giving people so that they don't have to throw up beforehand or hopefully not during to make it through that speech or at least that session?
Well, anxiety is one of the biggest causes of fear of presentations. Almost 83% of the population are afraid of speaking in public. And I believe it's like almost anything. The more you do it, the better you get and the less nervous you are. And I think humor is a really great tactic when things go wrong because it's a human moment. And we're very fortunate because of COVID, we almost opened a new door to human, not frailty, but just human situations. People saw your kids, your pets, your hair looking terrible, which
Never.
right. And messy houses. And, we really gave each other a lot of grace. But what it did is it sent this new trend that it's okay to be a little vulnerable. So what I tell my students is that be prepared and anticipate. Like I always say, anticipate what the reaction is going to be. What are the questions you're absolutely going to get?
Right.
And then anticipate what you hope someone might ask you or say or do that will allow you to elaborate on things you don't have time to say originally. And then anticipate what you're most afraid of. And it could be someone heckling you and saying, I disagree with you, or what about this? And if you anticipate and think about it, you can write down a little note to yourself. Like if someone does say this is how I'm going to answer it. I always say in my question and answer class, like, don't let a bad question dictate your answer. You don't know. Maybe someone asked this person's question and they're frustrated, so they're going to ask a really bad question because they need to be heard. And you can say something like, I really appreciate your question. I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is this, but you know what? I'm going to spend some time on it and I'm going to get back to you. So there's always a way to handle it. A really scary thing that happened to me on Home Shopping, which is your worst nightmare, is I was doing a picnic show. I was selling 20 picnic products, a foldable picnic table, baskets, thermos, utensils, all of that. And I was selling this thermos that people who hiked Mount Everest use. I don't remember the brand, but what the difference exactly. Nadine, I should get you that for your birthday. So, and 4 easy payments of $9.99.
Yeah, 99.
So what differentiated this thermos from any other thermos was how cold it would keep things or how hot. And so my stylist would put a ball of ice cream into the thermos and I'd say, this will keep it frozen. And I would turn it over and the ball of ice cream would not fall out. And then I'd show it to the camera, right? Well, for some reason, the stylist was on vacation that day or was messing with me and they put regular yogurt in it. So I'm doing my shtick. I'm taking the top off and I'm like, and this ice cream is frozen. It over. And all this yogurt fell.
Oh no, that's so mean. What'd you do?
Yeah. So what am I doing? I'm on live TV. And I said, I just took a pause and I said, it looks like we ran out of ice cream.
Yeah.
And and then I took my finger and I'm like, but this is still delicious and cold. I said, let's go to a product shot while we clean this up. Now, could I have anticipated that? No. But my job is to make my audience feel comfortable.
Right.
And if I freak out or look who to blame or make excuses, I'm distracting them from the message.
Right.
By the way,
you need to sell that thermos.
Got to sell that thermos. Got to put my kids through college.
That's right.
But, if you've ever watched a show like Saturday Night Live where the character breaks and they start to laugh.
Right.
Jimmy Fallon was the worst at that.
Yeah.
You always watch them, right? Because you're interested in them not getting the job done. Yeah.
Well, these guys could always get them out of there, right? Like when they're around Chris Farley or Will Ferrell, it was very hard. You could see guys like really try to keep it together.
Yeah, but let me ask you something, Ben. When you saw it happen, wasn't that more fun?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Right?
I agree.
You wanted to see them break. It was even funnier for you. So I always think about that as like human moments or what make you feel connected. So let's say your tech isn't working, right? You don't say, oh my God, my tech's not working, or I can't believe it worked earlier. You try it. And then if it doesn't work, you say, you know what? Tech isn't working today. I'm going to act it out for you. Or I'm going to visualize it for you. So keeping cool, under things, everything has a chance of going awry.
Yeah.
Anticipate what could, plan for what you can, and if not, calm down, breathe, humor, honesty.
So in that same light, humans love to build people up, but they also love to crash, don't they? They love to see them come down, but then there's always the other side of the hero's arc. So if you get someone to pivot, like Robert Downey Jr. is a good example. Child star, had a drug thing, went down, and then next thing you know, he's the Iron Man. So when people come to you, how do you get them to pivot either back in their industry or to a different industry?
Well, I'm not going to get them to pivot. I'm going to help them create a new story. But I'm wondering if what you mean is, how do you change your reputation, perhaps?
Right.
Is that?
I mean, pivoting can mean different things for different people. Like sometimes people do change industries, or like Matthew McConaughey, he goes from a rom-com guy to a serious actor. There's different kinds of pivots, right?
Or as we talked about P. Diddy, right? The diddler, the diddler, get out of this.
I think his pivot is going.
Client, yes.
He's going to jail.
I think his pivot's going to jail, and I'd definitely not be able to help him with that. But, what I say is, you need to show up consistently as the leader you want to be, or show up consistently in the new way you want to be seen, so that people believe you and it's credible. But you also have to use your origin story. Why do you want to pivot? Why do you want to go from this to that? And there's usually an origin story, like this was a side hustle for me, or this has always been my passion. If not now, then when? And, I can take all of this that I've already done and I can apply it here. But when you're pivoting, you also have to realize, what are my learning gaps? What do I need to know to be credible? And that's on you. Do you take a course? Do you study online? Do you ask questions? Do you ask people for, referrals of who can train you? Can you shadow? Can you intern? Can you do a side hustle for free so you can learn what it's all about? So these are all tools you can use. The problem people have with pivoting and what makes them feel afraid is there's no guarantee. Yeah. So they have the outward influence, which is people are going to think I'm crazy or that I'm failing at what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And you want to get the approval of your family and your loved ones, but you also want your circle to think why is this person pivoting at this time? Right? So you want to come from a position of strength, which is, I've always wanted to do this. It's been, something I'm interested in, and I've done this enough, been there, done it. And I'd love for any leads. I always say, you have to publicize your pivot so people can help you. Don't be ashamed. The other thing that makes people stuck is there's no guarantee of success. Maybe you won't make as much money, or you're not an expert in this domain yet. And I say to people, there is no guarantee. But you know what the guarantee is? Who you are. Are you someone who puts your nose down to the grindstone and works super hard? Do you have a great work ethic? Are you a problem solver? If you are, and you've had a history of success, those qualities are going to be carried over to your pivot. And I say, bet on yourself. You know what you're like. So for me, I had imposter syndrome for many years. I'm very afraid of failure in my earlier years. And I could never be in debt. I could never be late, with deadlines. It's just who I am. But now, as I'm in my old age, there's never been a time in my life or career that I've missed a deadline. Never. So if on a Sunday night, I don't feel like prepping something, if for something on Wednesday, I'm not going to torture myself. I'm going to say, you know what? I know you're going to get it done. It'll get done before Wednesday, maybe not tonight. That is the grace that I've given myself, because I have an awareness that I've never missed a deadline. So even if I know I'm going to make it. So I encourage my people who pivot, what are your innate strengths? What can you count on? That will carry you through.
Can you give us an example of one or two people you worked or counseled with that, have pivoted successfully?
Well, I think Alex Rodriguez is a wonderful example. And how I met Alex was I was teaching with Tyra Banks, and he knew a professor who I work with at Stanford. He knew about the class, and he said, could I be a guest on that? Because he's pivoted a lot. I'm sorry, he's changed his personal brand. So I said to my friend, tell him I teach reputation management, and I'd like him to come in and speak about his steroid scandal. And then we'll talk about the other class. And he was great. And he got my number and called me right up. He's like, yeah, I'd love to be in your reputation management class. And we became friends. And he's like, do you know anybody who consults with people? I'm like, Yeah, me. He knew it. And he's like, will you fly out to LA? I'll fly you out and we'll talk about everything I'm doing. And he was doing Shark Tank at the time and becoming a broadcaster. And what I love about Alex is he had a dream job that very many people want, which is to grow up being a baseball star, right? But his dream was to be in college and to be at business school. Like he feels like he missed out on a major part of his life, living out everybody else's dream. So there's a shelf life, obviously, to being an athlete. But when he had his steroid scandal, he took that year off that he was suspended and he went back to school. He went to therapy. He made apologies and he showed up in a different way. So he will be the first person to tell you I was a jerk. You know, I have the longest suspension. I lied. Talking to my kids was the hardest conversation I've ever had. And so since that, he has walked the walk consistently to be the person he wants to be. He's a philanthropist. You know, he is such a generous soul. He is an expert now at broadcasting. He created his own show to help athletes with their finances. He does real estate. So, you know, I watch him and every year he grows into new areas. Then there's still skeptics. Like people still think, oh, Alex did this and he's a jerk. And when people say that to me, I'm like, don't you believe in second chances? And look at AA and look at all these things. Like, don't define other people by one bad event. Don't throw stones at glass houses. We all have at least one bad event that we wish no one knew about. But give someone credit for growing out of that bad reputation and pivoting to something new.
Right. And there is a line that can't be crossed back, right? There is certain, like the Diddler, for example, like there is some things that like you can't come back from. And so you can gain maybe, let's call it redemption internally, but people will maybe never forgive you, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. You know, I think this is very symptomatic of cancel culture, but I also think that they're tiers. You know, like Bill Cosby is not going to come back from that. There's just too much damage done. But, you know, I'm also a great believer. And by the way, you see a lot of the people who are being canceled, you know, public figures who are in the media and have some really genius talent. And I think sometimes these people think the rules don't apply to them or their genius is also wrapped up in a dark side. Yeah. But I do believe in separating art from the person. You know, if you look at Picasso, he was an abusive person. He was a little crazy, but his work is still lauded and beautiful. And I appreciate his work. And so if someone asked me about Bill Cosby, I'd say, you know what, they should show The Cosby Show. That was a remarkable show that opened up audiences to Black America and what it could be and what it should be. And that poor cast doesn't get any residuals. And I think that they should get the royalties. They should show it. And I think that whatever money Bill Cosby would make should go to a cause for women, for abused women or sexual assault. So I think there's a way to do it. I know that when you asked me the question initially, when people pivot their reputation or they face challenges, I refer to something called the trust radar. And this is by Daniel Diermeyer, and it's from his book, Reputation Rules. And it has 4 axes that help you redefine your reputation and also message effectively. So the first thing is empathy. And what that means is that if you are in the middle of some sort of scandal, right, who feels harmed by you, right? And so the first thing you do is, I am so sorry for this person. I can only imagine what that felt like, or I own the fact that I, did this. Empathy comes first. The second thing is transparency. And what that means is, what's the context behind what happened? What's the why? Why did it happen? This doesn't mean making excuses. This means I was doing this. I messed up. I should have done this. But tell the people the story. Like things like no comment or my lawyer told me I can't say it. That doesn't fly anymore. Then there is commitment and expertise. And expertise means who's the right person to message. Like, for example, if there's a giant fire in North California, like you don't want to see just a firefighter talking. You want to see the chief of the fire department coming and talking about the dangers and what we can do. Because the chief shows that he's got the expertise, he's the right person to talk to you. This is important enough for him to speak on it. And then finally, it is commitment. And what that means is, what is the path that you're going to take to rectify? And it doesn't just say like, I'm going to take care of this. It's like, how are you going to take care of it? And what's the timeline? So the 4 axes, again, are empathy, transparency, expertise, and commitment. And if you can do all 4 of these, you can actually change your reputation and get yourself out of a difficult situation.
You know, it's a
Like,
good
they can do
example of
personal
that.
things too. Like your kids can say, I am sorry I didn't do the dishes. I didn't do them because I was messing around on my computer. I am the chief dish person. I will be in charge of it, and I will commit to doing it all week. I think it works both professionally and personally. So if my kids are listening, you got this one. You know how to fix it.
But you know, when you said that, it kind of reminds me of one about gray area, which is Kevin Spacey. I listened to his podcast with Lex Friedman, and he had been, out of the sight for so long, and he actually got acquitted on all his charges, but he also apologized. So he did stuff that was wrong. So he's in this like kind of gray area where he's atoning. He didn't do anything criminal, but he's got to repair. And he's a wonderful artist. He's a fantastic actor. So it's like, it's kind of, you get pulled in both directions, that you can see that he's gone through a very difficult process in the healing process. And I think most people do believe in redemption, right? Like we want people to be redeemed.
Absolutely. I think people love a hero story, like, a come clean story. And it's funny, I teach a class on cancel culture, and, you can't even say that phrase. People get crazy about it. But what I say in that class is, before you attack and castigate somebody for saying something that maybe they're just ignorant about, or they've been raised thinking, instead of being angry, say to them, that's so hurtful when you said that, because of this. And I'm not sure if you're aware. And I want to let you know that. And then, do you have any questions? Like, can we use an example like that as a bridge instead of being divisive? And I think if we could have that idea, and I think social media is so terrible because you can like or dislike or repost. And, a lot of people spend hours looking to create problems. It's so hard. It's very hard to escape. We brought up Kevin Spacey. For me, I think what I would advise him to do is get on a platform and be honest and say, obviously, I've done the wrong things. I read the signals wrong. I didn't want to admit it. I was a celebrity, and I always feel like people want something from me, and I hurt people, and it's my greatest regret. All I can do is try to move forward and be a better person. And so I'm volunteering here. And I took a break from acting. Fortunately, I love acting, and it's a way I try to serve people. But I understand the anger, and I understand it's going to take time for people to heal. I just hope that I can get back in and do what I do well, because that's the one thing I'm really proud of. So that would be my narrative.
Delivery. It's Oscar worthy. They need to AI you with his head on it. Like you just gave him the tools to hopefully fix. Yeah.
Well, when Ellen DeGeneres was going through her time, my friend was a producer on her show, and I sent him a whole narrative, like what she should say and what she should do. She used a little part of it. I don't even know if she ever saw it, to be honest. I'm sure she has very well-paid people to tell her how to message, but, there was part of the message that resonated with me. I think the biggest problem is getting defensive and making excuses in anything. No one really wants that. What they really want, like I said, is ownership, accountability, and empathy for those who are harmed. Right. And then what's your plan forward?
Tell us about how many hours you'd have to be on live and Home Shopping Network selling. I'm super interested in that.
I did 4 hours live every day, and each show would be an hour, and each show would have 20 products and all different topics. They wouldn't necessarily all be 4 in a row. It could be 2 and then 2. But it was exhausting, but also exhilarating. And I really, I was very ashamed of this chapter in my life, Ben, and I didn't put it on my resume for a long time because it was so cheesy. And also to leave the #1 morning show, Good Morning America, do home shopping, it felt like a sellout in a way. Fortunately, I got back to ABC with The View, but what I've learned, and this is what I say about pivoting, is like it's something I leverage now. I had the best education of how
Right.
to be persuasive and how to tell a story, how to know my audience.
Yeah, I never had a sales background. I've always been on the buy side my whole life. My sister started with it, and I think that's invaluable. Cold calling or calling on people that you don't know, or selling thermoses that have yogurt in them, whatever it may be.
And so, you had a last lecture last year, and I want to cover some of the points that you gave for 2024. And I know that the topic was called, If Not You, Then Who? And the first thing I want to do, and we'll do this in a bit, is, I have a slide, the principles to live by, because, they really reflect your core values and the passion that you bring. Okay, so I've got the slide up here. And I know, again, this reflects your core values, the passion you bring to relationships you have. And one of them that I found very interesting in the middle is listen when people tell you who you are. And you covered that a little bit, but maybe, what do you mean by that? Because sometimes you hear people say, people by the actions, not what they're saying, but this is different. This is listen when people tell you who you are.
Well, people, for us, she told me who I was, my brand.
Right.
And I'm forever grateful, even though I didn't appreciate it at the time. But I think you and Ben, I'm sure, have this. Like, I'm sure someone comes up to you and says, Nadine, you are so good at this. Or Ben, thank God I can rely on you for this.
Right.
Right. And you're pulled into certain situations because of who you are and how you always show up. And a lot of us want to focus on the negative, like our fears and our imposter syndrome, instead of listening to people telling you how great you are. And it starts early on, like, people always like, this is what I've always heard. Allison, can you write that down for me so I can say it exactly the way you said it? Or could you write an email for me? Or could you get on the phone and pretend to be me and say it? But I'm not good at accounting. You definitely don't want me doing your accounting. So people have always told me this is a gift of mine. I could have had a great career at Hallmark, writing Hallmark cards. I always thought about that. So I think that you have to listen when people identify what makes you different and special and own it and then leverage it and find a story or an example. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. So that's a task. You know me well. So I want to see you on the fly. Tell me who I am and what do I do with that? Like, is your superpower? Is it just your values, or what is it that when you're saying these things, and what do people do with that?
Well, I think what it does is it helps create also a self-confidence that you don't have to be anybody but you.
Okay.
For you, it's really easy to see who you are. I mean, and I'm not just saying this because you invited me on, but you are seriously one of the greatest people I know. And if you were to ask me what you deliver, like, you are seriously a no bullshit person. I hope it's okay I said that. Right? Like you're like you are going to say it like it is, and you never sugarcoat it, but you're not offensive or diminishing. But there's always power behind what you say. Like there's a confidence and a certainty that what you say is true. And so you're not going to waste anybody's time, and you're going to make them better for being with you. You're also one of the most curious people I have ever met. You're incredibly positive. You approach everything with the same energy, whether or not you have a broken rib or not.
Or many. Yeah. So what do you do with that?
You know how to message.
Then you have certainty, like alignment that, like, so does someone take that feedback? They say thank you, hopefully they like what they hear. And then do they process that and say, well, yes, it reflects on who either I want to be or what I want to put out in the world? Or, how does someone take that feedback from someone who knows them well, right? Or is it just making sure that you're aligned? What do you do with that?
I think it's a little bit of everything, but I think, you're at a point in your life where you know yourself.
Sure.
Right? So this could probably be more applicable to younger people who are struggling a little bit more. I don't feel like you struggle with who you are. I think you know exactly who you are, which is a gift. But many of us do struggle. But what it does is it shows kind of your consistency, your brand, and you know what you have to offer. But this is why people come to you and trust you.
Right.
Everything is about trust.
Yeah.
Like if you don't trust somebody to care about your feelings, to want what's best for you,
You be a business partner or a life partner. That's true. If you can't trust them, then
Yeah.
it's really hard to move forward on things. Right.
It really is. And so, all of that kind of fits into, because trust to me is another foundational value to really good communication. Is what she's saying true, or is she saying it in a performative way just to elicit something?
Right. And I guess that's the thing too, is you should be asking several people to find out, is it consistent feedback? Are they coming up with a similar top 5? Or are you getting different things from different people, in which case maybe you're more of a performer and less consistent in what you reflect to the outside world, right?
Yes, I love that. But I also want to say one caveat, which it's okay once in a while to be performative. Like if you're an introvert, but you have to go and be an MC somewhere, you need to flex.
Sure.
And so what I'll say to my clients is like, for a half an hour, you can do this. Like for half an hour, I want you to know that you've got to go out there and be the life of the party. And you have to, conduct this meeting. And then when you're finished, like go collapse in the corner.
Right.
But for that half an hour, you bet on yourself and know you can do it, and practice and be prepared and put on that coat of confidence.
Right.
Because none of us can stay in our hole and be what we want to be. We have to take into account the people we're interacting with, because everything we do or say signals something. And a lot of times my students get feedback, which is that they're kind of snobby or not warm. And the truth is they're just shy. And so when they get
the resting bitch face, right? That's the other one.
That resting bitch face. And, I joke, because if I have my regular listening face, this is what it looks like.
Right.
That's resting bitchy face. What I've learned is if I'm on a panel, if I'm on Zoom, if I'm in a meeting, or if I'm teaching with a colleague, whenever I'm not speaking, someone's definitely watching me.
Right.
And so I will have this face.
Right.
I'll always have a half pleasant smile.
We had, one of the things that we know you coach about is being accountable. What are the key takeaways on how to do that and why it's important, and what's the foundation of that in growing and improving your brand?
It's a great segue, Ben, because it's still also, it goes right into trustworthiness and knowing that people can count on you to own something. So, I once made a mistake with Tyra where I put out a memo to our class our first year, and I put pictures from our prep meeting. And I thought I had permission because I said, can I take pictures of this meeting? She was so angry at me, and she sent me this email, which is like, I can't believe you've broken my trust. I didn't tell you could publish those pictures. You signed my name on a memo welcoming the class. You didn't clear with me. By the way, it was a very innocuous memo, like we're so excited and all that. But
right.
I almost peed my pants.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God. And this is such a rookie mistake. I've worked with celebrities my whole life, and I didn't think to clear it with her. And I was like, she's not going to want to teach with me, right? So I wrote her an email and I said, Tyra, you are absolutely right. Like, I started with empathy.
Yeah.
I'm like, I am so sorry that I didn't check with you first. That was the wrong thing to do. While I thought that I had permission to use your pictures, I should have gone the extra, mile and checked with you once again. I will never sign your name to a memo without clearing with you. And I said, but one thing I can guarantee you is I don't make the same mistake twice.
Right.
And thank you so much for being honest with me. And please know that I am going to be better.
Right.
And she just wrote me this lovely email, which is, no worries, all's good, onward.
Good.
Right?
Which is generous and the right way to do it. Like message delivered, message received, message fixed, we're moving.
Exactly. Like I couldn't do anything more. I could have cut off a pound of flesh and presented it in a bow, but she didn't really want that. And I was really proud of her. Like she was setting boundaries.
Right.
Now you're going to have different situations like that. But when you might have done something wrong, or you did it and you didn't mean it, own it and say, wow, yeah, I'm really sorry. I did do that. And I didn't anticipate it, but now I really see why that upset you. Like validate somebody,
right.
Validate their anger or their hurt. And then, like I said, give them a little context and reassure them that you've learned. And I really feel like it's genuine, it's not bullshit, and it works.
Yeah, and Nadine knows this. I'm the king of apologies, and that's because I made a lot of mistakes. Like, it's like, yes, I did take the cookie out of the cookie jar. You learn at a young age. So I have a fun question for you as we come to the end of this. When we went to dinner, you told me you know everything about pop culture. So how about this one? Name the names of the kids of Brad Pitt.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for honoring me. We have Zahara, we have Knox, we have Pax, we have Vivian, we have Maddox. I think that's it. I'll go from oldest to youngest.
Oh, wow. It's impressive.
I mean, I wouldn't know how to check you other than if I get Google.
Maddox, Pax, Knox, Vivian, Shiloh,
the dancer.
Oh,
yeah, the dancer.
So those are the kids, and thank you for making me look really good.
Yeah, well, it's impressive.
Yeah,
Well,
that brain power could have been used somewhere else, but thanks, Ben.
Well, Allison, we may have to get you back on the podcast because I feel like we've just scratched the surface on all the topics that you cover. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, your humor, everything today. So if our listeners want to connect with you, whether for coaching or otherwise, or just hear more about your teachings, where can they do that?
I would say just go to my website, which is www.allisonkluger.com. And it tells you all about what I do, and there's a way to reach me.
Awesome. Thank you so
great.
much.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you both. This was really fun and excellent questions. And I enjoyed talking with both of you. Thanks again.